Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? We are going to pretend today that it is Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. It is for you, but not for me. I'm going to try and pre-record this Tuesday presentation for you because there was so much that I wanted to get to the other day, and I feel like it's not a time to drop off in the production of the show, although I would like very dearly to do so. And that may happen yet. It's a long summer, but I had a couple of stories that I wanted to share with you, and I figured this is a good opportunity to do them. We'll see whether I can get them done in, relative peace and quiet. I can't hog up the house the whole day and tell everybody to be quiet. So what happens in the background, just like it will what is effectively tomorrow for all of you when the aforementioned piano gets moved in. It'll, I guess, sound like what it sounds like, and we'll just see how it goes from there. A couple of good stories that really would have fit in Monday's show thematically, but we just didn't have the hours for it. We talked an awful lot on Monday about the issue of reopening school, and I imagine that will dominate a lot of our discussion as we proceed through the summer, both on the show and elsewhere on Twitter. For those of you at home wondering what to do with your own kids, there's a couple of stories that impact this. The one I was thinking of sharing the other day that I think we'll just jump into right now. Very interesting, a lot of ramifications, a lot of implications, a lot of, I can't think of any sort of other vacations. A vacation is the one I wanted to take. But this one was in the Washington Post. You may have seen it over the weekend. For parents who can afford it, the headline reads, "A solution for fall. Bring the teachers to them." And it sounds very nice if you can afford to do that, as we're warned right in the beginning. And, of course, most people can't. And, this isn't, we're not talking about ultra-rich people here either. They have a very interesting idea for how they're going to make this work. Thought I'd share it, and I guess we can start talking about the potential problems with it. Not for them, but for everyone else, I guess. This a piece written by Laura Meckler and Hannah Natanson. Or should say Natanson, N-A-T-A-N, Natan, right? S-O-N. This, again, for the Washington Post, and it was was it a Friday piece? Let's see. Yeah, I guess it was. But it didn't catch up with me until the weekend. But let's dive right into it here. Fed up with remote education, parents who can pay to have a new plan for fall. Parents who can pay, right? Who can pay, have a new plan for fall. I've missed the emphasis on that entirely. But all right, here's the plan. Import teachers to their homes. This goes beyond tutoring. In some cases, and it's relatively clever if you can afford to buy into a thing like this. In some cases, families are teaming up to form pandemic pods, where clusters of students receive professional instruction for several hours each day. It's a 2020 version of the one-room schoolhouse, privately funded. And that's really the key there. Weeks before the new school year will start, the trend is a stark sign of how the pandemic will continue to drive inequity in the nation's education system. But the parents planning or considering this say it's an extreme answer to an extreme situation. With novel coronavirus infections rising in large swaths of the country, school districts in many big cities and suburbs are planning to start the fall with distance learning, either every day or for part of the week. President Trump has implored schools to resume in full, and many health experts agree, partly because remote learning went so poorly for so many in the spring. But many local leaders say the health risks are too great. Children do not get particularly sick from COVID-19, it's said. It doesn't say it's said in this text, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes, I guess. But less is known about whether they can spread it to others. School officials also worry about the health of teachers, and districts are daunted by the logistics of keeping students and staff from coming into close contact with one another while indoors. You'll recall that we read the other day the experiences in Israel. It seems that there's been a total blackout of that information among people who are interested in blacking it out, at least from their minds. People pretending that there's no adverse reports from anywhere around the world where they may have resumed school, and that's just not true. I think pretty universally, where they've resumed school for a long period of time, they've run into serious problems and had to shut back down again. Perhaps not universally, but on a school-by-school basis, certainly. Anyway, we'll continue with this piece here. Parents are worried about the health risks too, but they are also worried that their children will fall behind, and they fear they will be unable to work even from home while supervising children. We had lots of family discussions about what we wanted to do, and is it worth it to pay extra? And we said yes, because they can. Said Katie Franklin, who has a 7-year-old daughter and lives in Herndon in Northern Virginia. She's in talks with a few other families to hire a teacher to share. The estimated cost for her family, at least $500 per month. And again, it's one thing to do it with 7-year-old kids in mind. It's quite another to deal with it for high school kids who need specialized instruction. Anyway, next section here. This is a thing now. Across the country, families are gathering with strangers in Facebook groups and friends over text messages to make matches. Teachers are being recruited, sometimes furtively, to work with small clusters of children. A Facebook group dedicated to helping families connect and learn how to do this drew 3,400 members in 9 days, with at least 7 local groups already spun off. This is a thing now, said Phil Higgins, a psychotherapist in Salem, Massachusetts, who joined with 2 other families to hire a woman to create a pseudo-summer camp for their 4 children this summer. They're now considering hiring this woman, who normally works as a school-based behavioral specialist, as a teacher for 40 hours per week during the school year. She would help the kids work through their school-offered remote learning. We wanted someone who could do a better job at homeschooling than any of us felt like we did, Higgins said. He said the cost would be about $1,300 per child per month. In Lower Merion Township, a suburb of Philadelphia, Carrie Pestronk and her 2 sons struggled through remote learning in the spring. If it continues into fall, she wants to make school from home as normal as possible. She's trying to recruit a handful of other children and a teacher, perhaps someone finishing college or graduate school, to teach from her basement. She's particularly worried about her 2nd grader. I want him to know at 10 o'clock he's got a teacher who's downstairs. Why not 9? I don't know. She said, it's not me who is forcing him to do it. That was the problem. Interesting. Yeah, the kid's oppositional when it comes to the parents doing it, right? Alexandra Marshak, who lives in Manhattan with her husband and 2 young sons, is exploring a learning pod with 3 other families. The original idea was that parents would take turns teaching, rotating hosting duties, but then one parent suggested they rent a studio apartment for the venture. They are also now considering hiring a professional to do the teaching. Marshak, who is out of work, said she's concerned about spiraling costs, but at this point, she said, everything is on the table. Our next section here, Widening the Gap. Not everyone, did you realize this was the case? Not everyone can afford truly private education, and these arrangements are raising concerns that this is just another way that the pandemic is exacerbating inequities that course through the educational system. Already, low-income children struggle for access to computers and Wi-Fi service and face pressures at home that wealthy families do not. Now this. These arrangements will allow children with affluent parents and connections to get ahead even as the system makes it harder for other children, said, oh my goodness, what is this name? Leuro, L apostrophe Heureux, my goodness. Leroux Louis McCoy, that's easier to pronounce, a sociology of education professor at New York University, who will probably say that I need more education, in French anyway, certainly true. He calls it a fresh example of opportunity hoarding. Interesting. He wishes that parents would also work with their schools to find solutions for all children by pooling resources, for instance. But that's socialism, so forget it. Most parents will act in the interest of their child, and you can't tell them not to, he said. I say, act in the interest of your child and add some equity to it. Marshak in Manhattan says she thinks about the equity issues. Her son's elementary school has many low-income families, and she knows they probably cannot afford supplemental help. She would be open to working together, she said, but she doesn't know them. Okay, well, that's all. That's the problem. You don't know them. Of course, you could get to know them, but that's a tall order. I can understand it, but there it is. We have a very small group of friends. We settled on these friends when our kid was in nursery school, she said. That raises a whole other slew of questions about how do we expand our general social bubble. And I think we all can see kind of what's at the center of that, but all right. It's one thing to believe in widening your social circle and working out the inequities. It's another thing to gather the courage to actually go and do it. I could, those of us with some social anxieties can understand. These questions have also been raised on the Facebook group called Pandemic Pods and Micro Schools, which is mostly being used to facilitate these arrangements. The frantic activity I am witnessing of families soliciting private tutors for their children at the tune of hundreds to thousands of dollars to homeschool their children is frightening to many black parents and parents of color, wrote Allison Collins, a member of the San Francisco School Board who identifies as black and mixed race. Nina Hausman, a white mom in Oakland, California, asked parents to consider inviting in, without charge, children whose parents cannot afford private schooling. She added, "Demand your schools are also working on helping with this. This is a concrete way that we can and must use our privilege to prevent worsening inequality." In Portland, Oregon, which has its own problems, Laura Sutherland came upon a new Facebook group called Portland Micro Schools with nearly 1,000 members and could not believe what she saw. Or maybe she couldn't believe that all the kids weren't out rioting like the president says is happening. There's another interesting story floating around out there about the disparity between the picture that the president is obviously trying to paint of Portland in constant chaos and danger and the actual lived Portland experience that the rest of Portlanders and those in the area are experiencing, in which nothing has really changed a great deal. There's a little bit more graffiti around, but the protests aren't necessarily a daily part of their life, and it certainly doesn't warrant the presence of any kind of weird cosplay federal troops in the area. All right, but back to this story. Again, Laura Sutherland in Portland, Oregon, couldn't believe what she saw on the Facebook pages, right? She thinks sending her 6-year-old daughter back to school would be unsafe, and she knows her daughter will need supervision while learning from home, but Sutherland said she would quit her job and struggle financially to help her daughter before she would hire someone from the outside. It just seems really privileged, she said, and it does, because it is. Franklin in Fairfax said she's mindful of these concerns but is not letting them stop her. We can pay, she said. We know others can't, and there will be a gap, and that's unfortunate. And I guess that's the end of the discussion there. A cottage industry is our next section. It's not all ad hoc parent organizing. An industry normally focused on providing tutors has seized this moment and is working to connect families with educators. Jennifer Shemtob, the owner of Teacher Time to Go, I guess that's the right way of reading it, not Teacher Time to Go, but rather Teacher Time to Go, a small company working in the Philadelphia suburbs, said demand is intense. She's offering a package of 3 hours of tutoring 4 days a week. For one family, the cost is $480 per week. If two families join, with up to 6 children, it's $720 a week total. What I'm seeing is families just wanting that reassurance that their kid is going to get support one way or another, she said. Colleen Gangian, Gangian, an education consultant, works with high schoolers in the D.C. area. She said she has received inquiries from more than 20 families asking whether they should participate in arrangements she likened to nanny share on steroids. As mother to a third grader and a preschooler, she's also seeing chatter every day on a Facebook group or in Facebook groups and in group texts. It's all anybody is talking about, she said. I'm missing this entirely, but my kids are older. She said the prices start at $25 or $30 an hour for a college or graduate student. A trained tutor would cost $50 to $100 an hour. The premium option, poaching a teacher from a public school, could cost as much as $100,000 for a year, she said. Two Fairfax County teachers said they had been approached by multiple families asking them to take over the education of their children. Both spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of retribution from the school system. The first teacher has requested a leave of absence from the school district because she fears contracting COVID-19 if she returns to the classroom. She was considering taking one of these jobs until learning that it could put her permanent job in jeopardy. Now she probably won't do it. The second teacher has not yet decided what to do. She said one father made it clear to her that money was no object, offering to pay whatever she'd like. Okay. In Broward County, Florida, Christy Kian, Kian, who used to teach at a private school, said she will make more money this school year educating 4 children in 2 families, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. After setting this up, she said she was contacted by 5 other families seeking similar arrangements. While it's benefiting me, it's also benefiting them, she said. That's commercial trade for you. Yes, they are having individual private education. And, that's, that's a pretty matter-of-fact, blunt statement to end it on. I mean, thanks a lot. I think we kind of concluded that, but another awkward ending there. But I did see some discussion about this over the weekend, and it's really odd. And I saw some people pointing out, and I think I agree, this is like Betsy DeVos's dream come true. Driving public school teachers, in the case of the last couple of people anyway, driving public school teachers to consider abandoning their jobs at private schools and presumably then quitting the public school teachers unions and agreeing to teach only in private and privately funded situations. And I have to put it that way because I said moving from public schools to teaching only in private school, which these things are. These would be extraordinarily small private schools. And I got some objection from, when I discussed it on Twitter, from a teacher who said, well, it's not that, don't forget, private schools are, susceptible to COVID-19 too. There's nothing about the disease or the money involved in privately funding education that makes it less likely that you'll get it. And I know it was Twitter. It's not that, we're talking about like private schools are somehow immune to this stuff. It's just that they'd be moving into an even more private situation than a private school. I presume that Betsy DeVos would be even more thrilled with the idea of the ultra wealthy resorting to this sort of education, I guess. Although I assume that a lot of people who came up in the elite private education world would miss or would say that this whole thing misses the point of elite private school education, which is connections more than anything else. But really, though, the idea that you could break up the local public schools and poach away the teachers so that they would be teaching in a private situation, but doing so without the protection of a union and without perhaps long-term contracts and maybe with no benefits or, no real clear way to even negotiate or renegotiate the contracts, except person to person. So in other words, being hired more or less at will. This seems like a great deal for Betsy DeVos and a great way to destroy public schools and not disrupt the education of the moneyed elite in any serious way. So I don't know, a little bit troubling and a little troublesome. I'm not certain exactly how to do it. I guess the best proposed solution there was the one, I think, probably understandably from the family in Oakland that says, hey, how about you invite somebody in who is not as privileged and couldn't possibly take part in something like this on a financial basis, and between the rest of you participants, you pick up the cost. That would be a great thing to do, and I think you'll probably have a lot of trouble putting together a great number of those pods, but it would be nice if there was a Facebook page that was dedicated to doing things that way, and say, okay, for every 4 families, you pick up a 5th that can't afford it. But who knows whether people would even, I assume there will be people who will at least be wary of accepting the offer, because it does put you in an awfully awkward position, doesn't it? Dependent on people who aren't, accountable to you in any way for the way that, and in fact, you're accountable to them. If anything, you have little in the way of voting rights unless they set it aside in formally in writing as part of their charter that they adopt, whatever they might do. And they would never be required to do that in this situation, but you're gonna have to build some serious protections in there. And I could see it would be awfully awkward to raise your voice and ask for any kind of changes if you were receiving your education as a gift this way. Naturally, there are probably libertarians out there, none listening to this show, I'm sure, who would say that's the way they ought to feel about public education right now, in terms of their relationships with people who pay considerably more in taxes than they do. But with schools, local schools being hooked up into the local tax base, none of their neighbors will have that problem. So, anyway, I thought that was really kind of troubling and like a great creative solution. But yeah, once you got to look at the larger picture of things, not really sure how we would resolve that. And I guess in all likelihood, the Franklin's probably most representative of the group doing this. And just saying, I recognize that that's terrible, but I have an appointment scheduled right now for my kids to get taught, so I'll have to talk to you later about that. Anyway, on the same subject, returning to school, I thought I would share this piece that came by from Arthur Kaplan, who placed it in, he's got a partner here, David Lilienfeld, if I have that right. Yes, okay. And put their article in Newsday, Long Island's newspaper. Should schools reopen in the fall is the question. That's supposed to grab your attention and pull you in. That's what everybody's talking about. But the punchier stuff is down below in the body of the piece. It's all right here, really. When the school year opens this fall, more than 50 million children will, if the White House has its way, enter into more than just the schoolhouse. They will go into one of the largest unregulated experiments ever conducted. You don't like those unregulated ones. Well, maybe Republicans do. In the wake of COVID-19, are they safe in going to school? And we're not in the wake of it, we're still in the thick of it. While many parents appreciate the need for schools to open, many are understandably concerned about this question. Schools not only educate, they also foster social development, and for many children, distance learning was hardly a success in the spring, which is why parents worry about their children's safety in school. The problem is that we just don't know. Epidemiologists and other health professionals lack the data to conclusively answer that question. So we shouldn't be listening really to the people who say the issue is settled. I've heard nothing about it, or kids just don't get it, or at least kids don't pass it on. That doesn't seem supported by evidence. Arthur Kaplan is a professor of medical ethics, by the way, and so is well versed in the questions posed here. So what we face is an experiment with our children. Surely falls under the purview of medical ethics, right? In medicine, scientists conduct experiments in the face of uncertainty. These trials aim to answer questions like, will this new cancer drug cure someone? Scientists conduct experiments, discuss with patients the known risks of using the new drug, and answer questions using available data. This is the morally necessary process of getting informed consent to participate in a study. Lacking data on the risks of sending children back to the classroom, we essentially will conduct a giant unregulated experiment. Yet no informed consent has been provided by those children or those parents. The mechanisms our society has developed to ensure that any experiment involving humans is ethically conducted, such as reviewing the plans to be implemented to assure adequate protection of the children, especially those with special needs, have just been tossed aside by the Trump administration in its haste to open schools. To date, though, no committees have been established to provide external review of what happens to children as schools open. Israel didn't do it. Sweden didn't do it, though they had the chance, right? We read about that as well. There have been inadequate pilot demonstrations of how infection risks for children, school children, will be minimized. There is no agreement on what will be done if there's an outbreak of infections. More testing and tracing capacity will surely be needed to minimize the risks of opening. Will it be available on time? If additional teachers, janitors, and bus drivers are needed, we must secure funding for them now. An oft-made argument holds that COVID-19 infections in children are benign and that students don't infect teachers or vice versa. But we don't really know that because the available data are simply too sparse to be informative. Consider the virus is neurotoxic. Yes, please do keep that in mind. Recovered patients have reported impaired cognition, delirium, fatigue, and memory lapses. A parent might rightly be concerned about the effect of infection on neurobehavioral development. We need to start collecting the data needed to see whether development is affected now, not sometime in the future. We'll continue with this after this break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. So we left off in the middle of Arthur Kaplan's piece. And he had a co-author with this one. I just remember Arthur's name offhand here. David Lilienfeld. And they too make excellent points. We left off with the point that we needed to remember that the virus is apparently neurotoxic and that recovered patients have reported impaired cognition, etc. And we just don't have much data. We got to start collecting data to see whether the development, whether neurobehavioral development is affected now and not sometime in the future. And the same applies to multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, already identified in a small number of infected children. We don't know how common it is or why some kids are impacted when most appear not to be. Recognizing that opening schools this fall is an experiment that needs to be treated as such, we have much work to do if we are to follow the processes developed to assure safe and ethical experiments. Safety is paramount if and when the school doors open. Isn't that the least we should do for our children? And I think it is. They think so too. Again, it's Arthur Kaplan, by way of handing out the titles here, Director of the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. David Lilienfeld is a physician and principal epidemiologist at Right for the Farm. That's WRITE, for the Farm, PHARM, a consultancy focused on the development of, you might have guessed, pharmaceuticals. So, okay. Well, that rounds up, I think, today's, what I had for you yesterday anyway, school reopening related news. Got a couple of other pieces here, but one of the things I wanted to add, if you recall, in signing off yesterday and reading you what was going on, or what was then coming up on Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I ran into something. I ran out of time at the end, as I often do, talking about some of the international news. And I must say, I'm going back to this one because I recall that in going and signing off, because for me it was only a couple hours ago, that I was reading it and then I ran out of time, and okay, we cut off the broadcast, and then I finished reading the sentence and I said, holy crap, are you kidding me? Except it wasn't crap that I said. So now I'm censoring myself. But here it was, this last item. Maybe you've heard this news, maybe not. Maybe you listened to the show, maybe you didn't. Here was the deal. It was tributes pour in for 20-year-old Australian Olympic figure skater. You didn't know they had them in Australia? Well, they don't. They import them. Well, I'm sure that they do. But they imported this one from Russia. Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya. My goodness, what a mouthful. They make the names there. You probably, maybe you know it, know the name and can say it because you heard it on TV, you followed the sport, whatever. Apparently, she gave up her Russian citizenship and went to skate for Australia. And she's died at the age of 20. And I saw that news the other day and I thought, if it's, are they going to tell me it was coronavirus or something like that? What happened here? And well, the end of the sentence here in Justice's roundup put it pretty bluntly. She died after, well, conveniently, he says, a little trademark. Guess what? She fell out of a window in Moscow. Can you believe that? A fifth-story window, like the 400th person to just fall out the windows. What's happening with the windows in Moscow? And, of course, the answer is Vladimir Putin is throwing people out of them. There's nothing wrong with the windows. But, apparently that was the trigger, too. She gave up her citizenship and went to skate for Australia. And I guess that bothered Putin enough that he took the opportunity when she was back in Moscow, which I do have questions. Why do you go back to Moscow when it's pretty, clear? Well, it's raining people in Moscow. Don't go there. If you're out, stay out. But I'm sure, her whole family probably lives there. And she probably also thought, what does he really care if a Olympic figure skater goes to skate for Australia? He's got bigger problems than me. And I'm sure I probably would have convinced myself of the same, but then I would have fallen out of a window and you wouldn't hear that from me. But it was also speculated, Justice typed and messaged to me afterwards. I guess a few athletes have taken the plunge, that is, changed their citizenship, or does he mean taken the plunge out the window? Oh, yeah, that's probably what he means. When they blew the whistle on the drug scandal, I guess the doping stuff and drugs, but this was because she left when the scandal was blowing up. So that's pretty scary news, but what have we learned from it? 1, don't go to Moscow. 2, don't go in any buildings higher than 1 story. And 3, he takes everything personally, I guess. My God. And I guess we knew that, and he's a brutal dictator and a vicious murderer. And Donald Trump loves him because that's the way he is with dictators and murderers, I guess. It's pretty amazing. I don't even know what else there is to say about it. Okay, let's see. Other things that I wanted to hold on to. There was a story suggested by Brian Monroe, who I'm sure was sitting up in Canada dumbfounded by this story. And I've seen several versions of it. The one he sent me is from Complex or complex.com. How do we emphasize that? But, and this rendering of the story, you'll recognize it when I give you the headline. Judge sends black teen to juvenile detention after she didn't do her online homework. Perhaps you heard the story. If you haven't, but you have kids who were doing remote schooling during the last semester, during the pandemic, you probably recognize the problem, but not the solution. The kids were not doing their homework in their online classing all over the world. Classes, I should say, teaching, schooling, learning, what have you. My kids certainly didn't love keeping up with their homework. We did our best to try and force them to do it, but I think our school district was pretty explicit, and most others were likewise, that they were giving kids all kinds of breaks. The homework wasn't allowed to be graded, or it would be graded only on a pass-fail basis. And I don't know whether that made it harder or easier or what. I'm sure it was a mixed bag for some people, but once the kids found out it didn't count, some kids, most kids probably were just like, well, forget it. You're never going to get me to do this now. How does it happen that, well, most kids, black or white, all over the country, get away without doing their homework or whatever, or could have a convenient excuse for not doing it. And the one person who does get in trouble just happens to be this black teenager. There's a bit of a backstory to it. Let's see, how long is this write-up for? I think it's pretty brief, but seems to hit all the highlights. Sarah Jasmine Montgomery writing this piece. A heartbreaking new report by ProPublica reveals how a 15-year-old black girl in Michigan was incarcerated after allegedly failing to keep up with her online schoolwork. The teen, who is currently in custody at the Children's Village, it sounds so wonderful, doesn't it? Children's Village Juvenile Detention Center in the Detroit area, which just makes it sound like even more fun, has been in the facility since May. The student, identified in the story as Grace, reportedly had difficulty keeping up with her schoolwork after her school switched to online learning due to COVID-19, as most people did. Grace has ADHD, a learning disability that makes it difficult for her to receive an education without live class sessions. We know all about that one. Grace was previously placed on probation following a fight with her mother and petty theft on school property. However, Judge Mary Ellen Brennan later decided to incarcerate the teen. While everyone else was letting their prisoners go, we're going to incarcerate this one. Not for any additional behavioral issues, but because of an alleged failure to do her schoolwork. In her ruling, Brennan said Grace was, quote, guilty on failure to submit any schoolwork and getting up for school, calling Grace a threat to the community. We'll see if there's more explanation in here, but the backstory, if we don't get to it, was she was on probation as a result of this fight and the theft that she was, convicted of on school property. And the terms of her probation were such that she had to attend school and keep up with all of her schoolwork. So she did have this additional thing hanging over her head, but it's kind of amazing that there was no leeway in imposing this sentence, given that kids across America who have no criminal history or no issues with the legal system were likewise finding it virtually impossible to get themselves to take their homework seriously. And, she was in that sense no different than anybody else, but maybe the judge didn't have young kids at home. I don't know, but it seems like a real miscarriage of justice here, particularly, like we said, as they are letting serious felons out of jail now in order to save them from the dangers of COVID-19 spreading in penal facilities. Anyway, back to the story. Grace's caseworker, Rachel Giroux, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, filed a request that she be detained. Why? Why not request the opposite? Before ever confirming whether she was or wasn't completing her academic requirements. According to ProPublica, Grace's teacher later told Giroux that her student was, quote, not out of alignment with most of my other students, unquote. Additionally, Grace was scheduled to have one-on-one help with a special education teacher the day after Giroux reported the alleged probation violation to Judge Brennan. Let me be clear. I'd love to be clear, but it keeps jumping around on the page due to pop-up ads. Let me be clear that this is no one's fault because we did not see this unprecedented global pandemic coming, teacher Catherine Tarpe wrote, saying Grace is trying to get to the other side of a steep learning curve mountain, and we have a plan for her to get there. It's now been over a month since Grace's mother has been able to see her. The 15-year-old is not scheduled to be released anytime soon, despite Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's call for juvenile detention to be suspended in response to the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic. or pandemic, as the case may be. Every day I go to bed thinking and wake up thinking, how is this a better situation for her? Grace's mother told ProPublica. The teen had been attending family therapy with her mother. Oh, it's moving again. Following the incidents for which she received probation. My mom and I do get into a lot of arguments, but with each one I learn something and try to analyze why it happened, she said during a hearing on April 21st. My mom and I are working each day to better ourselves in our relationship, and I think that the removal from my home would be an intrusion on our progress. Sounds like she's doing pretty well, educationally, I mean. Certainly could always be better. As ProPublica points out, Grace's case is just one example of many ways black students are disproportionately targeted and incarcerated by the juvenile, quote, justice system. It is clear that kids of color are disproportionately involved and impacted by the system across the board. Jason Smith, who works for the nonprofit Michigan Center for Youth Justice, told the outlet. Oh my God, moving again. They are more likely to be arrested, less likely to be offered any kind of diversion, more likely to be removed out of the home and placed in some sort of confinement situation. People like Kim Kardashian, who retweeted the post below, are now calling attention to Grace's incarceration and calling for reform. The post below, well, bringing up this very topic. What kind of a country locks up a child for not doing homework during a pandemic? We must reform this disgusting system immediately. From Jessica Jackson, who I don't know, but it's a good point nonetheless. Grace's case isn't set for a hearing until September 8th, despite the fact that she's not receiving any direct schooling and meets less frequently with a therapist than she did prior to her incarceration. I want to change. I want to be a better person, Grace wrote in a distressing letter to her mother. Here I've realized how much you care and love me. I'm sorry I took that for granted. Please continue to send me pictures of me and you or just with anyone. I love you, Mommy, and miss you. How can you get a letter like that and not react? All right, well, just a weird situation once again. Just happens to be the black kids that get left behind. I'm sure there's someone else somewhere who's in a similar situation, but this is an illustrative example of, like they said in the piece here, something that happens disproportionately to students of color and black students, I guess, in particular. Just thought that was an interesting addition. Thanks to Brian for sending that one on. Let's see. Other items of some interest. You know what? We can stick with a theme here. Here's something else that I happened to see come by the other day, and I think David Neer was sending this around. A Washington Post piece here from Richie Torres. Richie Torres is the Democratic candidate for New York's 15th congressional district. And what the hell? That's basically what I have to say. According just my quick scan of the story here. Check this out. I'm Afro-Latino, Richie Torres says, but I can't join both the black and Hispanic caucuses in Congress. That must change. Well, he can't join them yet because he hasn't been elected yet. That's true. But I guess I don't know that much in particular about the 15th congressional district specifically. Maybe some of you do offhand. But in many of New York's congressional districts, winning the nomination is tantamount to winning election, of course, and this may be one of them. But check this out. Whenever I'm about to enter a new setting, like the New York City Council in 2014 or Congress in 2021, I never have the luxury of taking acceptance for granted. My life experience has taught me this. I often wonder, will I be accepted for who I am? A gay man, an Afro-Latino, a millennial, sometimes surrounded by older colleagues with more experience. I'm confident that I will be accepted, indeed embraced, when it comes to the House Democratic Conference, where more than 60% of members are women, people of color, and LGBTQ, a level of diversity without precedent in the history of American politics. But there is a caveat. The question of who I am racially will likely run into the binary buzzsaw of caucus politics. There's an antiquated rule. How do we even have this rule? Antiquated rule that prohibits members of Congress from joining both the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. The wall of separation between the CBC and CHC ignores the reality of racial identity. which feels especially tone-deaf in this present moment. You have to pick a side, so to speak. You can be either black or Latino, but never both. In real life, however, I am both, and there are plenty of people who are. It's crazy. We Afro-Latinos refuse to be divided against ourselves by an arbitrary rule that bears no relation to how we experience identity in the real world. Although an anachronism in our own time, the rule might have had its place at one point in history, and I'd love to know what that was. I hope you'll tell us, Richie. Founded about a half a century ago, both caucuses were intent on establishing their political power and creating space for the issues affecting their communities. When President Richard M. Nixon refused to meet with the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC famously boycotted his 1971 State of the Union address, citing his consistent refusal to hear the pleas and concerns of black Americans. The action pressured Nixon to appoint a special committee to look into their list of recommendations. After the 1976 elections, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus pressured President Jimmy Carter to appoint more Latinos after denouncing the lack of representation in his administration. There have been many other important achievements, but it's clear these caucuses have to bring their norms and rules into the 21st century and expand their influence and mission. The need for change is personal and political, as well as reflective of an evolution in how we conceptualize race in the United States. The very idea of intersectionality tells us to embrace the places at which identities intersect, rather than create false choices between them. I am both black and Latino. There's no need to artificially barricade one from the other. Racial identity is chosen and given. It is as much a product of the world's perception of you as it is of your own conception of yourself. When the world looks at me, it sees a black man, and that blackness, both real and perceived, has tangible consequences. I'm among the hundreds of thousands who were humiliated at the hands of the New York City Police Department during the height of stop and frisk, an aggressive police tactic that targeted mostly black men and was ruled unconstitutional as applied in the city. As a black man within the Latino community, I have felt the pain of colorism, including at the hands of my own family. My Afro-Latino identity enables me to see racism intersectionally, within multiple cultures and across multiple spheres, such as the criminal justice system, education, and immigration, to name but a few. Since the either-or rule is a policy of the Congressional Black Caucus, I have a personal plea to make to my future colleagues there, expecting Afro-Latinos like myself to be politically alienated from our own blackness, at a time when Black Lives Matter has become the rallying cry of a racially awakened nation, is the cruelest of ironies. When the CBC has internal debates about issues affecting black people, as it surely will in 2021 when I hope to enter Congress, I, as a black man, have a right to have a seat at that table. Denying me that would do great harm not only to me, but to the hundreds of thousands of African Americans and Afro-Latinos I will likely represent in the South Bronx. This is something I cannot accept. I am an agitator when I need to be, and agitate I will until this exclusionary rule is gone for good. And I guess they just haven't have they not run into this problem before? There have been no Afro-Latino? I don't know. But, there have been prominent Afro-Latinos in New York politics, everywhere. It's odd. And outside of politics as well. It is an anachronism, and I would gather that they've been waiting to remove it, and I guess maybe it's been sort of a we'll cross that bridge when we come to it issue. And, we're there now, we're nearly there, and I expect that they'll just cross it and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. We'll have to repeal that rule. And but good on him for bringing it up and making sure it's taken care of ahead of time. I can't fault anybody. I knew about Afro-Latinos, but I never bothered to look to see what the rules were. It's not really my place to be reviewing their rules anyway. But I guess it's just never occurred before. That's hard to believe. Although, in it's entirely possible that it has occurred before, and either people made their own choices, or there were some that didn't necessarily acknowledge both heritages in equal measure, I think. But I can't speak for those people exactly how they, I can't correct how they viewed themselves racially or ethnically. But there were those when I was working on the Hill who used to point out, for instance, sometimes there was great tension between the African American communities and the Hispanic communities that lived in close proximity in New York and New Jersey, and I know that it was theorized, for instance, one of the great lions of the Congressional Black Caucus, Charlie Rangel, very frequently found himself on the other end of that dividing line from the Hispanic caucus members, and there were a couple of Hispanic caucus members who were firm in their belief that he was simply refusing to acknowledge that he was in fact Charlie Rangel, not Rangel, as he had anglicized it. Very interesting prospect, but all right, we'll have to leave that to speculation, because I don't think he ever addressed it himself, and I certainly can't speak for him on that front. All right, let's see. We'll see whether a message gets left in the background with the ringy-dingies going on. I forgot the phones aren't muted when we're recording during these odd hours. Anyway, good point there from Richie Torres, and we'll see how they resolve that thing. I think that'll probably get wrapped up in late November, early December, as the caucuses begin to meet and plan out their agendas for the upcoming legislative session. Okay. Back to the Portland issue. Let's see. We might want to save this one for the other side of the break, because it's probably a relatively lengthy look at this. Not that long, actually. Why don't we dive into it? TPM had this piece on the legality of what they were doing and how did they get there. It's a loosely constructed argument, which he takes, Josh Marshall, from Ken Cuccinelli's appearance on TV over the weekend. Cuccinelli saying, not a quote, of course, but paraphrasing, "Totally legal and totally cool. How CBP and ICE now control your city." Last night, Josh says, I noticed an acting deputy secretary, and again, it is, yes, where's our recording? Our acting deputy secretary. It's important to note when all these people are acting. Acting deputy secretary of Homeland Security, who works for the acting secretary as well. Cuccinelli, though, told NPR that not only were they not pulling back on their actions in Portland, but that they planned to take them nationwide. The brief NPR interview is important because, along with other reporting that came out over the course of Friday, it helps us understand anyway, just what the White House is doing and the purported, I love it, legal rationale under which they are doing it. As we've discussed, even as protests have subsided in much of the United States, they've continued in Portland with an especial focus on Mark O. Hatfield Federal Courthouse inside the city. There has been a faction of protesters who've set off fireworks, painted graffiti, and thrown bottles, although they may even be just plastic bottles, thrown bottles at police in nightly standoffs. This federal building is key. The Federal Protective Service is the federal police agency with jurisdiction over federal buildings and other federal facilities and property around the country. We heard about 2 of their officers being shot not that long ago, right? Wasn't it also in the Bay Area? Comes up again. There's nothing particularly controversial or surprising about this, having a federal protective service. That is, when you go to a federal courthouse and see police, you probably know that they're not from the local police department. They're federal officers. The FPS has been housed within the Department of Homeland Security since the department was created in 2002. Unconfirmed political appointees at DHS, which include the secretary, the deputy secretary, and the commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, say that the FPS in Portland and in other cities has been overwhelmed by, quote, violent agitators. So they've sent in CBP, ICE, and other federal police agencies housed within DHS to support FPS's mission and, critically, under FPS's jurisdiction. In other words, in their view, it's really not ICE or CBP. They're just other federal officers supporting FPS since it's overwhelmed. The jurisdiction of FPS is being used as a hook or loophole to give CBP and ICE police powers over citizens in American cities for purposes of reported crimes entirely unrelated to immigration enforcement. In his NPR interview, Cuccinelli is clear on this. The federal courthouse there is protected by Federal Protective Services, who are being supported by both CBP and ICE officers because of the violence there and the graffiti. Later, he's even more explicit on the purported chain of command and who's calling the shots. The Federal Protective Service is responsible for protecting thousands around the country. And I guess that means thousands of buildings around the country. That is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security, and the CBP agents that you saw backing them up are doing just that. They are there, cross-designated to support FPS, not the other way around. We're helping them do their job because of the demand for more manpower in light of the violence, which is actually not happening, but that's what they like to call it. On its face, one would think, and we're right to think, how on earth is the Federal Border Police, which is what CBP is, driving around the streets of Portland, masked and in rental cars, smash and grabbing people who look like they might be protesters? That is a good question. Cuccinelli explains it very clearly, or pretty clearly, Josh says. FPS has jurisdiction over federal buildings. Any vandalism committed against a federal building or even protests which they think might lead to vandalism or violence is under FPS jurisdiction. They've interpreted the whole city of Portland as under siege by violent anarchists. I don't think anybody else sees it that way, but that's what they're hooking it to. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Maybe we'll set that up again by starting again at the beginning of the paragraph. We were just discussing how Josh Marshall saw Ken Cuccinelli justifying the use of the Federal Protective Service all over Portland and the Border Police, CBP, as well. What's the point of pulling them from the border and having them pull people off the streets in the middle of an American city? And as he says, he explains it pretty clearly. FPS, Federal Protective Service, has jurisdiction over federal buildings. Any vandalism committed against a federal building or even protests that they think might lead to vandalism or violence, as they like to include in this, is under FPS jurisdiction. So they've interpreted the whole city of Portland, which contains some federal buildings, as being under siege by violent anarchists. Though there's been no violence and no real indication that they're anarchists either. But never mind any of that. So, using the nexus of the federal buildings that exist inside Portland, they now see the whole city as under Federal Protective Service jurisdiction. Now, that's what they say, but would any court recognize that? I don't know. Maybe these courts, maybe Trump courts, I have no idea. But since FPS is a relatively small agency, and they now have to occupy all of Portland, not to mention the other cities that they say they're going to take over. They have CBP, ICE, TSA, and others. There are just supporting the mission. I hadn't realized that TSA had been involved in all of that. Well, that's how all of this comes together. CBP and ICE are among the most aggressively politicized branches of federal law enforcement and heavily supportive of the president's policies. Although they didn't really have any policies with respect to protests about Black Lives Matter or anything else. They're politicized because they are pro-strict border control and anti-immigration, and so is the president. But I guess they're just intent on following him wherever he may go. So if his whim tells him that people involved in protests in Portland, Oregon are violent criminals and anarchists, they're willing to believe it. They don't need any proof, and they're not getting any, so they must not need it. So, let's see. They're the most aggressively politicized branches, heavily supportive of the president's policies. They are also accustomed to, and indeed trained to deal with, people with few civil or political rights, and little ability to invoke the few rights that they have. The specific officers deployed in support of FPS aren't even regular CBP and ICE officers. They're the immigration equivalent of SWAT teams. The acting head of CBP openly says they won't wear name tags or numbers because This would allegedly put them and their families at risk from Antifa. In other words, they're explicitly invoking Antifa hysteria that one sees on Fox News and right-wing media to justify what are commonly understood as secret police tactics. They are the perfect vehicle for what the White House and these acting appointees at DHS want to do, which is to seek out confrontations which are consistent with President Trump's campaign agenda. In their current form, they really do amount to a federal police force acting at the direction of the political appointees at the Department of Homeland Security, none of whom are even confirmed by the Senate to be acting in their current positions. It is troubling, to say the least, and has enormous implications, but I'm glad he had organized some thoughts on this. But yeah, this takes you back to the original arguments about the Department of Homeland Security and its formation, not to mention the Patriot Act and the worry during the George W. Bush administration that both the formation of the Department of Homeland Security and the passage of the Patriot Act and subsequent revisions of the Patriot Act really gave away far too much discretionary power to the president, and all done, we've discussed this before, all done on the assumption that, well, we'll just never have a total lunatic for president who would abuse this power by simply saying, I declare all my political enemies, my domestic political opponents, to be terrorists for real, so that we can exercise these powers on them and grab them up and, throw them in Guantanamo, I guess. We all worried that George Bush would be perhaps willing to do this, but we also all worried that even if he didn't, that some future Republican president might very well do that. Certainly, it was a valid worry, both as between George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. They always came right up, they very frequently came up to the line of just designating domestic political opponents, whether they were peace demonstrators or environmental activists, and simply going to designate them domestic terrorists. Now, of course, we've got a administration that would think it was not only beneficial to them politically, but funny and legitimate policy making to own the libs by incarcerating them and designating them as domestic terrorists, especially if it was done in response to their protesting that in many cases it is the police who are acting as domestic terrorists, or even if they were pointing instead to right-wing militias. They'd be very, I think, entertained, the police would, at the prospect of saying, you're pointing out other people's domestic terrorism is the real domestic terrorism, and it's time for you to be beaten with a baton, possibly shot, and certainly sent away to Guantanamo. And the tactics that they've used to do it, and now snatching people off the street and frightening them half to death, only to say, well, no harm, no foul, because we don't count this as an arrest. You can see how easily that would be abused. But I wanted to bring you up to date on Josh's roundup of that activity. I don't know how else to put it. And I'll segue from there to this entry from the New Republic, which I think will remind us of something that we know to be the case. But again, some organized thoughts will help us come to grips with them, I think, a little bit better. Over at the New Republic, it is Melissa Grant who has written this piece. The dark obsessions of QAnon are merging with mainstream conservatism. We mentioned this yesterday, and I was thinking about getting to this article, and now we're doing it. Oh, and I skipped the name here. Melissa Gira Grant, G-I-R-A. It's not Gyra, is it? Or Gira? I don't know. Probably skipped it because I didn't want to venture to mispronounce it. But then I said, head the hell with that. Let's go back and do it. But, she lists her name that way and deserves to have it read. More deserving, perhaps, even still, is the actual product here. The dark obsessions of QAnon are merging with mainstream conservatism, with Republican candidates and Trump embracing the strange child trafficking fixated movement. It can no longer be dismissed as merely a conspiracy theory. which is likely to be misinterpreted as meaning that if you look hard enough, you'll find that it really is something more than just a conspiracy theory. It's not. It's just that more idiots who hold elective office and designated powers by virtue of holding those offices are professing, truthfully or otherwise, to believe in QAnon nuttery, and it's highly disturbing. I saw the other day, maybe some weeks ago, tweeted around the claim that the Australian Prime Minister was apparently tweeting around some QAnon materials, and I guess this was taken as an indication from knowledgeable Australians that he had bought into this thing. And what an odd situation that I don't think we anticipated that happening. Let's take a look here. The online furniture seller Wayfair, I did see that they were mentioned the other day in some weird tweets, is not engaged in child sex trafficking. I bet you hadn't guessed that. You might have thought they were just because you figure everybody is. The high prices of some of its industrial-grade cabinets does not mean that they conceal children, and yet these absurd evidence-free claims circulated so widely online that on Monday, Reuters published an extensive fact check to disprove them, and Wayfair temporarily removed some products from its site to add more details to their descriptions. There are no children in them, for instance. I mean, QAnon is so wacky. It's just amazing that they can get anybody to believe it. But that's why it's so fascinating as a thing. I was going to say as a movement, but it's so fascinating that it could even be considered a movement. It seems to me, it bears all the hallmarks of having been formulated as a joke, as a troll, more than anything else, and that there are people who appear to wholeheartedly believe it has just got to be the biggest joke in the world to the people who started the thing. It's really upsetting when you think about it that way. So we're going on here. They removed some items to add more details to their descriptions. The wild allegations of a massive child sex abuse ring hidden in public can be directly traced to QAnon, sometimes called the, quote, Great Awakening, which was once dismissed as a conspiracy theory, which it is, birthed from toxic message boards, but is now closer to a genuine movement. And again, I'm sure that she writes this advisedly, but in case she doesn't, come to me. I'll advise you on it. I'm not the expert on it by any means, but I think I get what's going on here. I hope it's reflected in the rest of this article. At this stage in its lifespan, QAnon can take an obscure post alleging absurd crimes to a social media trend, heard and shared by many people who have never heard of the movement. QAnon can no longer be shrugged off as a phenomenon confined to the internet. Now with dozens of Republican congressional candidates embracing at least some of QAnon's themes, and President Trump attempting to marshal its power to help keep him in the White House. As the host of one streaming QAnon program put it to Trump campaign official Erin Perrine when she went on his show in October of 2019, many QAnon adherents view themselves as the campaign's soldiers on the ground. The Wayfair meme was perfect for QAnon, driven as the movement is by people who believe they possess secret knowledge about how elites are buying, selling, abusing, and even devouring children. If you believe that, it's not much of a leap to imagine the child trafficking is taking place inside an overpriced armoire. I still think it is. I mean, not that it is happening, but I still think it's a leap. Anyway, the danger escalates with the next logical leap. If that's what the powerful are doing, what wouldn't be justified in challenging them? QAnon has inspired its adherents to plot kidnapping raids, stage a standoff with an armored vehicle at the Hoover Dam, and attempt a citizen's arrest that ended with a killing. The FBI's Phoenix field office issued a memo last year about QAnon posing a potential domestic terror threat. None of this has kept QAnon isolated on the fringes. In fact, the group is now becoming a force in what passes for the mainstream of American politics. Shared beliefs. The shared belief and attendant rituals of QAnon are core to the president's base. Journalist Jeff Charlotte. I make that mistake all the time. Sorry, Jeff. I'm inserting Shart into your name where it doesn't belong. It's so easy to do. It must happen to you all the time. Well, I don't know whether I hope it happens to you all the time or not. I kind of hope that's the first time it's ever happened to you, except I didn't want it to be me. But hey, that would take the pressure off me. Jeff Charlotte. My goodness. Who is the expert on this? I hate to undermine it by making jokes about the name. Well, he's traveled to many Trump rallies over the course of months for a story in Vanity Fair and found dozens of Trump supporters who believe that the Democratic establishment primarily serves as a cover for child sex trafficking. It's not a political party. It's just a cover story for their sex trafficking. That's an amazing thought. All right. Some of these Trump supporters, he writes, were familiar with QAnon's ideology and worldview, but most were not. It was, they told me, simply known. This is known. You remember that from Game of Thrones, right? Charlotte reads Q, and it's interesting, that name too. It's not spelled with the CH like Charlotte, the city. It's Sharlet, which makes my screw up that much more embarrassing, right? Charlotte reads Q. Maybe he even says Charlotte. That would make it even easier. I wish that was the pronunciation. I don't know. Well, he reads Q as a form of American Gnosticism, the gospel of Trump. And like the Christian Gnostic Gospels, it represents a form of secret knowledge reserved for the faithful, a truth, in scare quotes, you must have the eyes to see in order to believe. The truth of what QAnon adherents believe isn't the point. It's that they belong to a sect to whom the truth has been revealed. The QAnon faithful's belief in the omnipresence of child sex trafficking is not a feature of QAnon alone. As I have been arguing since before Q's rise, an only slightly moderated form of the child sex trafficking paranoia that animates it is utterly mainstream. Before the Q antecedent, Pizzagate, became notorious, with an attempted armed rescue of non-existent children sold into made-up sex slavery at the Washington, D.C. restaurant Comet Ping Pong, fighting sex trafficking through sensational rescues had become a national cause célèbre, as it had been widely venerated a century before when the sex slavery fight was enshrined in federal law. Even the mainstream anti-sex trafficking movement is populated by those who have invented claims, like the disgraced Somali Imam, upon whom Nick Kristof at the New York Times relied for gripping yet untrue stories of sex trafficking, or those who see criminal conduct when none exists, as Cindy McCain did infamously when reporting a mixed-race family as a suspected trafficking case. Wow, I forgot about that one. Unsurprisingly, anti-sex trafficking advocates capitalized on the Wayfair conspiracy theory to promote their efforts, including one backed by the president. With or without Wayfair, and I would love an explanation as to how they came to the conclusion that Wayfair was doing this. I mean, or do they just think any enclosed space would contain a child? I don't know. With or without Wayfair, child trafficking is real and happening, with 3 exclamation points. Tim Ballard, a Trump-appointed White House anti-trafficking advisor and CEO of Our Rescue, O-U-R, Rescue. I'm not certain why it's abbreviated, O.U.R. Not certain what it stands for. But he posted this to Twitter last week. This is not a small thing or a conspiracy theory, he added, but it is. This is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, but it isn't. Ballard never acknowledged that the Wayfair sex trafficking meme has no basis in fact, perhaps being careful not to alienate the constituency that drove the conspiracy theory to prominence. Trump wanders back and forth across the same line. He gives credence to both the mainstream claims of the ubiquity of sex trafficking, lost my place here, and the sex trafficking conspiracy theories. A regular QAnon talking point, for example, is that Trump is the toughest president ever on sex trafficking. No, he's a sex trafficker. Never mind that the Trump administration is abandoning victims of trafficking. QAnon adherents aren't judging him by that, and indeed only a vocal minority in the anti-trafficking community have criticized him for this. When Trump himself sends approving signals to the Q movement, that is enough to validate his toughness on trafficking. He amplified QAnon accounts from his Twitter account at least 185 times, according to Media Matters researcher Alex Kaplan, and uses hashtags that originate with such accounts, like Obamagate or Open America Now. These are some of the same networks that help drive the Wayfair conspiracy theory. How? Why? QAnon has similarly become integrated with the conservative movement as a whole. Former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn recently posted a video featuring what's become a kind of pledge of allegiance to QAnon and the movement tagline, "Where we go one, we go all." A Washington Post analysis of 59 Q-sympathetic Republican congressional candidates, 59, revealed that together they had amassed nearly 600,000 votes as of July 1st. Some of these figures just used a Q-related hashtag, but most, the Post reported, engaged with Q supporters to a greater degree, including promoting the movement or wearing Q-branded clothing. One, Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, has been supported by Representative Jim Jordan and received backing from establishment Republican PACs. I think I saw her tweeting just yesterday, babbling on about how blue states wanting bailouts due to COVID-19 should pull themselves up by their bootstraps and not try to take tax money away from states that pulled their own weight, like Georgia, which of course gets the whole thing entirely backwards. Georgia takes far more out of the federal system than it puts in taxes, and the blue states tend to do the exact opposite, but so what? She thinks there's children being sold in Wayfair cabinets. I think increasingly, at least some Republicans see QAnon and its supporters as a kind of political constituency that they can appeal to get some kind of political benefit. Kaplan told Business Insider, "There's already something of a QAnon infrastructure that these candidates can tap into, whether it be QAnon hashtags or QAnon shows on YouTube. QAnon's reach and power mean that debunking the individual conspiracy theories spread by the movement is not sufficient. QAnon is, if nothing else, a shared story, told and retold by its followers. What animates that story is also demands a response." Charlotte and The Atlantic's Adrienne LaFrance have both written about QAnon's overlap with some strands of Christianity, including those which have for decades found a home on the right. QAnon, writes LaFrance, may be propelled by paranoia and populism, but it is also propelled by religious faith. The language of evangelical Christianity has come to define the Q movement. QAnon marries an appetite for the conspiratorial with positive beliefs about a radically different and better future, one that is preordained. The American Christian right, Charlotte recently told Bill Moyers, was already undergoing a transformation under Trump. Evangelicalism might have an authoritarian streak, he said. Its reverence for a supernatural God was, he believed, this sort of circuit breaker that prevented them from going full racist. But now they're willing to put their money entirely on an actual person, Trump, and to build around his personality and to build around this man and his capability for violence and revenge. Q may not be a political movement, but it is a movement useful to politicians. It doesn't need a coherent politics for that. Its base is there for the taking. If a candidate can graft their campaign to its story, even if Q-adjacent conservatives don't really believe in Q, all they need to get a boost from the movement is a willingness to look as detached from the truth as the president. They'll get adoration from Q followers so long as they appear to return it. Trump, too, does not need to be a Q believer to share in its paranoid style of sex trafficking politics. At his rallies, he regularly invokes sexual violence to animate the crowd. This obsession with what is done to the bodies of children by Democrats is, like the rape fantasies with which Trump has taken to lacing his rally speeches, grossly sexualized, observed Charlotte after Trump's Tulsa, Oklahoma rally. It allows his followers to wallow in the most grotesquely taboo thoughts and to relish the revenge they'll take on those whom they imagine actually committing such horrors. While it's important to fact-check such things, you can't deflate the power of a fantasy with the truth. That's what's so intoxicating and potentially fruitful about Q for those seeking higher office. That fantasy of the power they hold, as the few to whom the truth has been revealed, could actually get them closer to real power. Everything I have heard about Q, I hope that this is real, said Lauren Boebert in an interview after her primary victory in Colorado's 3rd Congressional District. If this is real, then it can be really great for our country. I don't see how, but apparently that's what she's got on her mind. You tell me what you think. All right, let's see if we can't fit in one more short piece before the break comes up. Throwing it back to Portland, a little bit of a more humorous approach to things. Always good to check in with Alexandra Petrie in the Washington Post to see what she's got in store for us. How about this for a headline? Relax. I know I grabbed you off the street, but I'm just a criminal, not a federal agent, right? Nothing to worry about here. I always like the way she approaches these things. Hello, harmless passerby, and welcome to my unmarked van. I know this is very creepy for you, but I want you to relax. I am just a criminal, doing this entirely on my own dime and on my own time. And you can have recourse to law enforcement later. I know it would be terrifying if I were actually some sort of federal law enforcement myself, because then you would have no recourse. And furthermore, you might feel that the country had taken a serious turn. But no, America is still as great as it's ever been. I personally am a criminal monster who's constructing a sculpture out of mandibles to placate the elk god. But America's system of rights and constitutional protections is absolutely still fully intact. So that's good. I've gotten a lot of feedback during my years of seizing people without warning and placing them into this van. Do be sure to fill out the form, which is located in the seat next to you. And the number one piece of feedback has been that people want to know that America's system of rights remains in place. Congratulations, it does. Now you can focus on being scared of me personally, an extra-legal, non-state actor who should definitely not be doing this and who deserves to be punished as the criminal I am. Again, I am just doing this for myself, with no color of law whatsoever. I heard on the news that there was a building here that had to be repainted with 47 coats of paint. And to me, that was a summons to come onto the street and just start seizing people at random and tossing them into this van. But again, that is because my thinking is bad. I am in no way affiliated with any federal agency, not even of any kind. And frankly, I shouldn't be. You can also guess that I'm not affiliated because this van is unmarked and I am wearing some sort of desert camo, which is not really suited for an urban environment, but that's fine. I think it looks cool. The governor has not asked for me to be here, and the mayor has not asked for me to be here for two reasons. One, because they do not know about me, a private citizen, and two, because if they did, I can guarantee they wouldn't want creepy van kidnap bloke. My name needs work. Please suggest alternatives on the forum. In their beautiful city, one bit. But it doesn't matter to me what they want. I am here because I want to serve and protect America's men, statues, and women, courthouses. The way I see it, statues are more than people, buildings are extra people, and fences are children. It is so much worse, to my mind, to attack a symbol than it is to harm a person. That if I ever saw someone burn a flag, there is literally nothing I would not feel justified in doing, and no one who would be safe from my van or my bone-based sculpture projects. Again, my brain is bad. No, I will not tell you beyond that who I am and why I am doing this. But it isn't disappointing that I won't, because I am a criminal operating outside the law. Sure, I believe that I am the embodiment of justice and that the president asked me to be here and help, but neither of those things are actually the case. My mind is very broken, and I anticipate that I will soon be arrested. I am just a simple monster man with no pretensions to being political. Get excited for my jawbone shrine. We're almost there. God bless America. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what we can cram in our last segment. Definitely trying to stay up to date, given that we are doing a pre-recorded show today, but late breaking on Monday night, I got a hold of this piece scheduled for publication today, but you know how they do these things. In Salon, the work of Roger Sollenberger. I assume at this point that everyone will be talking about this. Lawsuit accuses former Fox News anchor Ed Henry of rape and current top talent of sexual harassment. So I guess we know part of the motivation behind the big let's cancel culture movement, and who knows what else. But interesting timing, particularly as Tucker Carlson prepares to move up the scales in I don't know what in the rogues gallery of Republican operatives. Let's get right in here. And well, I've got an editor's note for this one. This article references a lawsuit containing extremely graphic material that is sexual and violent in nature. So good morning. I think you've all had a chance to digest breakfast, depending on when you're listening to the podcast. 2 women filed a lawsuit against Fox News in a New York federal court Monday, alleging rape and sexual harassment at the hands of some of the network's top talent, if you can call them that, including the recently fired Ed Henry and primetime stars Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, of course, on a long-planned vacation or something like that for whatever reason. And I saw this story tweeted out with the accompanying comment that Fox brass were aware some 4 days or so before he left on vacation, this supposedly long-planned vacation, of these allegations against Tucker Carlson. So, you know, might have had something to do with it. Jennifer Eckhart, a former associate producer at Fox Business, accuses Henry, the former co-anchor of America's Newsroom, of rape and other forms of sexual violence. Her co-plaintiff, Kathy Areu, A-R-E-U, a regular guest on the network, filed sexual harassment claims against Henry as well as Hannity, Carlson, and the Media Buzz host Howard Kurtz. Wow, this is terrific. That is to say, awful. For the victims. And that's true. I mean, and honestly, of course. But what a set of accusations to make. And they got almost all of my favorite people over at Fox. I don't know. There are people I'd rather see go down than them, but fine. Interesting. The 4 men have also been sued in their individual capacities. Michael J. Williman, an attorney who represents the women, along with veteran sexual misconduct litigator Doug Wigdor, told Salon that Fox News had been informed of Areu's allegations against Carlson on July 9th, 4 days before the host announced that he would be taking a, quote, pre-planned vacation. It doesn't sound too good. A Fox News spokesperson confirmed in an email that the network had learned about Areu's claims against Carlson on July 9th and, quote, promptly investigated them. And then he took a vacation. Tucker is still employed, and this has zero to do with his vacation, which was legit and pre-planned, the spokesperson added. And we all had our doubts about that. The legal complaint itself is so graphic in nature that it includes a trigger warning. This document contains highly graphic information of a sexual nature. I didn't check this out before we read it. I mean, I saw the warning, but okay. Including sexual assault. At length, it details Henry's alleged attempts to groom Eckhart, oh boy, who claims she was asked to be his, quote, little whore and sex slave. Henry allegedly threatened Eckhart with punishment and retaliation if she did not comply with his demands. Hey, now, she hadn't agreed to be a sex slave, and you can't threaten her with punishment and retaliation until after it's agreed to, and then I guess it's all fun and games. I don't know. So I hear. According to the document, Eckhart was ultimately left, quote, violently raped while helpless and restrained in metal handcuffs. What? While Henry performed sadistic acts on her, I'm going to have to be careful here, without her consent that left her injured, bruised, and battered with bloody wrists. Now, my big question, and I'm sure the question for the jury, or in front of the jury, will be, did she appear as a guest on any shows with Ed Henry on them afterward? It's gonna hurt things if it was the case, but man, I mean, just because we won't, people will misunderstand, I'm sure, what the dynamics of this situation are. But, okay, the suit claims that Henry had earlier forced Eckhart to perform oral sex on him on network property, which I guess makes it worse, I don't know, before raping her at a hotel where Fox often hosted visiting employees, thereby facilitating, whether knowingly or unknowingly, Mr. Henry's conduct. That is also, well, that's an interesting claim as well. Wow. Never mind. I'll make no comment. I'll move on here. Henry allegedly sent both Eckhart and Aru lewd text messages. One message to Eckhart, oh boy, referenced owned and submissive anal sex. My kids are not around, I think, at the moment. According to the filing, others said F, but with the actual word, because he's not going to hold back. I'm not Ed Henry. I'm holding back. F you and your safe word. Oh, boy. You will know when I am done, and when you are owned, you don't get a choice. So we're getting a glimpse inside what Ed Henry considers to be fun, even if no one else does. Yet another text to Eckhart allegedly read, "Good long session last time. Left you bruised, battered, dazed, sated, begging for more." He doesn't use very much punctuation. He loses points for that. The hashtag perfect was included. He's a fun fellow. Henry allegedly abused Aru with a slew of wildly inappropriate sexual images and messages for several months this year, according to the complaint. The texts, which allegedly remain in the possession of Aru, include a close-up photograph of a woman's vagina being clamped closed by 4 clothespins. This is tough to get through. And a video titled "Fastest Interview, Candidate Selected in 3 Seconds." According to the filing, the video features a woman job candidate, exposing herself to the interviewer, who then selects her for the job. Immediately after Henry sent the video, he allegedly added, "Are you available for anchor interview?" Ho ho, he's funny. Network executives allegedly knew about Henry's misconduct as far back as 2017, when several women accused him of sexually inappropriate conduct amid a company-wide probe into sexual harassment at the channel. Remember that? That's because, of course, the big boss was a big abuser as well. The executives named in the suit included Fox News Executive Vice President of Human Resources Kevin Lord, Fox News President and Executive Editor Jay Wallace, and Fox Business President Lauren Peterson. The complaint alleges that the network did not take substantive disciplinary action against Henry, instead rewarding him with a promotion to co-anchor on America's Newsroom. I guess whereafter he does this, which is incredible, as well as a streaming show on Fox Nation. Additionally, the suit claims that HarperCollins, a Fox-affiliated imprint, signed Henry to a lucrative book deal. Fox News only took action against Henry ahead of this lawsuit, according to the claim. However, the network allegedly did not inform Eckhart leaving her to learn the news on Twitter and in press reports. It's heinous to do that to a victim like this, to force her to see him all over the news, Williman told Salon. 2 years ago, Wigdor's firm settled claims brought by more than 20 individuals against Fox News, including its disgraced former star anchor Bill O'Reilly and former CEO Roger Ailes. Williman confirmed to Salon that the firm had told Fox News about Aru's allegations last week. At that point, they had already been aware that we had represented her for 2 weeks, Williman said. For a period of time, Aru had been a regular featured guest on Hannity, Tucker Carlson Tonight, and Media Buzz. She claims that the hosts of all 3 programs cut her appearances after she pushed back against unwanted advances. Aru claims that on March 18, 2018, Hannity, in front of the full studio crew, threw $100 on the desk of his set and repeatedly demanded that one of the men in the room take her out on a date. "Who wants to take her on a date?" he allegedly yelled. "Take her on a date to Del Frisco's." Okay. Aru claims that she was stuck and unable to leave because she was still hooked into studio equipment, which could only be removed by a stagehand. None of the staff took up Hannity's challenge. He allegedly never invited Aru back thereafter. I'm not even certain how you get to that, but okay. Aru describes a similar setup as a guest on Carlson's show when an unidentified producer or writer allegedly whispered in her ear to stay put until the program was off air. She claims that no one would undo her equipment on set, making it impossible to leave. Carlson then allegedly invited Aru to his hotel room, where he specified that his wife would not be present. When she refused, her invitations to be on the show allegedly stopped. By the way, you can just sort of run off and damage the equipment. There's always that, but, she didn't know she would never be invited back at that point. So Aru documents a similar interaction with Kurtz, after which she accuses him of retaliating by cutting her appearances on his show. Fox News provided Salon with a lengthy statement which denied all allegations of wrongdoing and suggested that Eckhart lacks standing to sue the network. Well, that's something. The network requested that Salon print the statement in full, and so I guess they do. And here it is. I mean, it's going to be garbage, but let's look. Based on the findings of a comprehensive independent investigation conducted by an outside law firm, including interviews with numerous eyewitnesses, we've determined that all of Kathy Aru's claims against Fox News, including its management, as well as its hosts Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Howard Kurtz, and its contributor Gianno Caldwell, are false, patently frivolous, and utterly devoid of any merit. We take all claims of harassment, misconduct, and retaliation seriously, promptly investigating them and taking immediate action as needed. In this case, the appropriate action based on our investigation is to defend vigorously against these baseless allegations. Ms. Aru and Jennifer Eckhart can pursue their claims against Ed Henry directly with him, as Fox News already took swift action as soon as it learned of Ms. Eckhart's claim on June 25th, and Mr. Henry is no longer employed by the network. We expect Fox News to claim, as it almost always does, that an independent investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, Wigdor's office said in a statement. Wigdor claimed that the network's investigation did not include interviews with either woman, who both offered to meet under reasonable conditions. He called on Fox News to interview them in the name of public transparency. The first paragraph of the complaint says, Fox News would have the public believe that it is a different place from the Fox News that was run by former disgraced chairman and CEO Roger Ailes. Unfortunately, it is actually worse. Wow. Well, that was some rough reading, but I think we kind of got through it, and we really didn't even have to go back and do any editing at all. Once we got through the rough parts, I was afraid of how much worse it was going to get, and it must have been awful to experience, but I was afraid of what else was going to come up that I would have to figure out how I was going to read. And these people are crazy. I've never understood how you get the gumption to, what's a good word for it? I mean, there is nothing, but how you get the idea in your head that you can do this anywhere is beyond me. To do it at work, I don't know. I mean, I guess these guys in their jobs, they've pursued these jobs because the jobs come with power. I guess. I mean, it's not just a regular job. Like if they were painting houses, I assume they wouldn't be doing this. But I guess they feel like they've accumulated power and they're stars, and maybe they took Donald Trump's advice to heart. And when you're a star, they let you do it. They can get away with anything. And so I guess they just start testing the boundaries. And then who knows? Maybe there's a whole psychological profile where they have to keep doing worse and worse things to try and get the thrill out of it that they got from other things before once they get used to it. I have no idea, though. I just cannot imagine at work. Like, I don't know. Wouldn't you be mortified to have other people at work find out that you were that kind of person? But I guess not. I guess here it's what makes you king of the hill. I don't know. Well, Fox is disgusting, and the whole thing should fall in a volcano. And what else can I tell you? But I thought I'd mention that because it's probably, I'm guessing, going to be a hot topic this morning. And I guess you can see why. Well, how about some lighter fare from Politico? Wow, this is something I wanted to share also. I didn't really know what I was walking into with the Salon article. I just wanted to hear that Tucker Carlson was in trouble. And wow, we really got it over the head on that one. I can't stop thinking about it. But I will, as we head over to Politico for this piece from Mark Caputo. We can't pull it off, which actually puts me in mind of the last piece, actually, and I wish somebody would have done that and maybe chopped a few of the other ones off while they were at it. But we can't pull it off. Florida sheriff says he can't muster security for GOP convention. This is pretty hilarious. There's a lack of clear plans, adequate funding, and enough law enforcement officers, this sheriff says. That's the problem down in Jacksonville. The sheriff of Jacksonville, Florida, says he can't provide security for the Republican National Convention because of a lack of clear plans, lack of adequate funding, of course, for himself and his law enforcement officers, and a lack of personnel. As we're talking today, we are still not close to having some kind of plan that we can work with that makes me comfortable that we're going to keep that event and the community safe. Duval County Sheriff Mike Williams told Politico. Too bad. Sheriff Williams has just fallen out of a window in Moscow. It's not my event to plan, but I can just tell you that what has been proposed, in my opinion, is not achievable right now from a law enforcement standpoint, from a security standpoint. The controversy deals one of the biggest potential blows to President Donald Trump's decision to hold an in-person nominating convention during a pandemic, the other being the pandemic, I guess. The proposal has already been beset by concerns over safety and reports of high-profile Republicans declining to attend, not to mention the fact that they fled Charlotte, North Carolina over masking requirements, only to land in Jacksonville and then find that they would be facing masking requirements there as well. Although today, I don't know how it is this morning, but yesterday we found out that the president wanted everyone to know we've always been at war with East Asia. He's always also worn a mask. Plus, he was the one who knew it was a pandemic before anyone else. Now we are pro-masking all of a sudden. We'll see how long that lasts. Anyway, so now they land in Jacksonville, and they're like, yeah, if you don't tell us what the plans are, I don't know how I secure the event. And the thing is, they don't have any plans. They were just like, let's all get together. They have no idea what it takes to do logistics of anything. Williams, the sheriff, a Republican, wouldn't definitively say there is no way the event could be held, but he said he had grave doubts, especially in an era of heightened protests concerning police use of force. Yeah, that'll be some image of police using force at the Republican National Convention. Williams said the event, scheduled for August 24th through the 27th, was announced in June, giving his agency little time to plan and prepare. The Republican National Committee has not yet nailed down which convention events will be at which venues, making it even more challenging, and a pledged $50 million grant has been pared back to $33 million. And Williams said there are strings attached that make letting contracts too difficult. RNC spokesperson Mandy Merritt said in a statement that the RNC is working closely with local leaders in Jacksonville on planning for the convention, including on health and security measures. She added that the Department of Justice will provide millions of dollars via a safety grant. Jacksonville has accommodated upwards of 70,000 people for football games and other events, and we are confident in state, local, and federal officials to be able to ensure a safe event for our attendees, she said. The venue was changed to Jacksonville from Charlotte, North Carolina, after that state's Democratic-led government clashed with Trump over safety concerns over holding a convention during a pandemic. Trump insisted he wanted a full convention at the time. Trump has since backed off his demand for a full-blown convention, but the proposal has continued to meet logistical hurdles as the RNC has failed to commit on specifics, such as whether Trump would have his nomination at an indoor arena or an outdoor arena. The RNC could not immediately be reached. Meanwhile, Florida has become a breeding ground for coronavirus infections. That's made it difficult to recruit more law enforcement officers to come to the event. In early July, the Florida Sheriff's Association asked departments in the state's 67 counties for 2,000 officers, according to an email obtained by Politico, but only 500 were able to go. Bob Gualtieri, president of the association and Pinellas County Sheriff, told Politico over the weekend. Williams also asked the Florida Police Chiefs Association for help, but he's still coming up short. We do need law enforcement officers, and we've gotten commitments, but not to the level we thought that we needed. And a lot of that is people having virus concerns from their communities, and I understand that, Williams said. But there's a lot of things that need to happen. An event schedule nailed down, and being able to sign contracts and spend money so that we can prepare for the event. And none of that has happened yet, he said. So here we are inside of 40 days, and I haven't really pulled the trigger on anything RNC related when it comes to finances or contracts. And so, only related to security, mind you, nothing related to any of this. Other sheriffs told Politico they sympathize with Williams. Martin County Sheriff Bill Snyder said he's sending about 20 officers, but wouldn't question the convention happening. He's committed to helping Williams. It's like a gunfight. Sure it is. Why not? Everything's like a gunfight. I don't think we should have gunfights, but if you have one, I'm coming, Snyder said. Oh my gosh, it would be a noxious brew of vitriol. It will be a noxious brew of vitriol and emotion. And he's looking forward to this? I don't understand. Volusia County Sheriff Mike Chitwood said Trump's security detail already makes such big demands of local law enforcement that it makes it difficult to supply security for him. I've always said they should withhold it, which Chitwood witnessed firsthand during the president's recent trip to Daytona Beach. Chitwood said he didn't believe the event should be held and said the RNC is struggling to do the impossible. There's a fear of telling him no, because anyone who tells the president no, it's like off with their heads, Chitwood said. Chitwood, who committed to sending about 24 officers, said conventions need months of planning, and that's without COVID-19. There are going to be tons of issues, he added. This has something that has never happened before, and for some reason, common sense is being thrown out the window. Well, they throw everything out the windows these days. Williams referenced the lack of time repeatedly, saying that even if he started planning in June, it would have been difficult to pull off. At virtually 75 days, it was an incredible lift, and everything would have to be perfect, and needless to say, it is not. Williams said, so, with that, we can't pull it off in any kind of current configuration. But again, it's not my job to plan the convention. It's my job to be able to provide security for it. But I can't even do that right now in this time frame with this current configuration of the event. So, they've effed that up too. And like illness and death, there's only so much BSing you can do to try to get past it. If you can't put the logistics of an event like this together, there's only so much you can do to not look like a total failure. So he's going to look like a total failure. All right, well, we may just have time for one more story. We'll see if we can cram this all the way or most of the way into today's show. Also from Politico, this one struck me as important and something we may have to keep an eye on going forward. Dem leaders demand FBI briefing on foreign interference campaign targeting lawmakers. This sounded really weird. In a letter, this is the subheader here, in a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray, the Democratic leaders describe mounting alarm about the potential foreign threat. Natasha Bertrand, Kyle Cheney, and Andrew Desiderio on this story, usually a pretty good combination. The Democratic leaders are asking the FBI for an urgent briefing arising out of concern that members of Congress are being targeted by a foreign operation intended to influence the 2020 presidential election, according to a letter they released publicly on Monday. and I did see someone commenting along with this letter saying it's couched in terms that make it sound like they've heard something really awful and much, much worse than they're able to hint at, but due to classification concerns, they're being vague about it. Now, check this out. I mean, we're all attuned to the possibility that there would be influence campaigns, but check out the specifics that they do give us. Among the Democrats' concerns is that a Senate investigation being led by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin has become a vehicle for, quote, laundering a foreign influence campaign to damage Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, according to two people familiar with the demand. Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer demanded the all-Congress briefing on Monday, citing, quote, specific intelligence that a foreign influence operation targeted lawmakers to launder and amplify disinformation in order to influence congressional activity. Though the letter did not mention the Johnson investigation, it included a classified addendum that the two sources say identified the probe as one of the sources of their concern. We are gravely concerned in particular that Congress appears to be the target of a concerted foreign interference campaign which seeks to launder and amplify disinformation in order to influence congressional activity, public debate, and the presidential election in November, Pelosi and Schumer wrote in their letter, which was also signed by the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Representative Adam Schiff, and the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. All four Democratic signatories are members of the Gang of Eight, a group of 8 lawmakers who are briefed on classified intelligence by the executive branch, which seems to indicate to me they probably heard about this in a Gang of 8 briefing and said the rest of the Congress needs to hear this. They're requesting that it go wider than the Gang of 8. Asked about the Democrats' contention, Johnson, who chairs the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, told Politico, "They're simply wrong. And Schiff is the last person to talk," he added, except he's already spoken, and so you are wrong. He spoke before you. You're the last person to talk. A Johnson aide added that the senator himself had sought an FBI briefing on these issues. Committee staff has already requested and received a staff briefing on this issue, and Chairman Johnson has requested an additional briefing at the member level, the spokesperson said. That briefing has not occurred in part because the agencies requested additional information from minority staff, which has not followed on these requests since mid-May. The letter's authors did not publicly offer any additional details about the nature of the counterintelligence threat they described, but lawmakers of both parties have warned for months that foreign powers like Russia are intent on interfering in the 2020 election process, including, Democrats say, through Johnson's investigation, which targets Biden's son, Hunter. I'm getting a picture for what's going on here, are you? If not, we'll go over it in a minute. The probe centers on claims that a Democratic public relations firm sought to leverage Hunter Biden's role on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, of course, to influence the State Department under the Obama administration. Johnson has asked several former State Department officials to testify, and he is eyeing subpoenas as soon as this week if they do not agree to appear for depositions voluntarily. Johnson renewed his demand for transcribed interviews and documents from the former officials days after a Ukrainian lawmaker, Andrei Derkach, who has met with Trump personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani to discuss investigating the Biden family, used a news conference to accuse the Bidens and Amos Hochstein, a former special envoy for international energy affairs at the State Department, of an elaborate conspiracy, of course, to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from Ukraine. Yes, that's who's stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from Ukraine. The last time senators were briefed on election security and foreign influence operations, Democratic lawmakers confronted Johnson behind closed doors about his investigation, arguing that it threatens the integrity of the 2020 election and relies on Russian disinformation to tar a political opponent. They cited in particular Johnson's initial effort to subpoena Andrei Telezenko, who has pushed unsubstantiated claims about coordination between the Ukrainian government and the Democratic National Committee in 2016. Johnson dropped plans to subpoena Telezenko after the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force briefed senators about him, focusing on concerns over his credibility. Last week, Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, the top Democrat on Homeland Security, renewed his request for briefings, defensive briefings from the FBI as Johnson's investigation intensifies. We may or may not be able to run through the last couple of paragraphs, but what seems to be emerging here is that it's become clear to counterintelligence operatives who were briefing the Gang of Eight that Johnson's committee appears to exist, well, not the committee, but the investigation appears to exist for very little reason other than as a funnel for Russian and or Ukrainian, Russian-leaning Ukrainian misinformation and a deception campaign. We'll come and testify if you subpoena us. We'll come and say the things you wish were true about Hunter Biden, and then you'll be able to say, aha, look what we've discovered in our quote-unquote investigation. Apparently, it's that obvious to everyone, and they just want to make that plain to everyone
From
in
Daily
Congress.
Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, so there you have it. I guess that's the closest we're getting to political union between Russia and the United States. We're turning the United States Senate over to the Russians to testify and manipulate at their whim. Sounds like a good thing to do right before an election. I wonder what will come of it and whether Chris Gray will be of any help. We'll check back in with it tomorrow.